You're listening to Cosmic Cousins Soul-Centered Astrology. I am your host, Jeff Henshaw. Thanks for tuning in. Cosmic Cousins is dedicated to honoring the interconnectedness of our universal family through embodied health, self-discovery, and deeper learning. And it is here to bring you back into alignment with the cosmos. So thank you for being here as always. Hey Cosmic Cousins, welcome to our Scorpio New Moon partial solar eclipse episode for the year 2022. It is right here at the beginning of Scorpio season, and where I'm in the Pacific Northwest. The rain has moved in almost to the day that the sun entered Scorpio. And when I was walking my dog this morning, the wind was coming in really strongly. It was pouring down rain, and I could hear like a can rattle across the street, and the wind chimes were blowing. It was feeling super witchy and autumnal and Scorpio-like. So how are you sensing the shift of this time of year? Fixed water is Scorpio. So over these 30 days, which is typically October 23rd to November 22nd, Scorpio season, it's fixed water. The fixed signs are right in the middle of a season. So we're right in the middle of autumn on the northern hemisphere. And if you're listening from the southern hemisphere, you're right in the middle of spring. So we're in this pivotal time of the year, and it is really transformational time of year. That could be a keyword we use for Scorpio. You know this already, though. We're familiar with Scorpio here in the esoteric and occult community, as Scorpio is a sign that's connected to these practices. So we're going to get into all of that on today's episode. We're going to explore the invitation of this solar eclipse, partial solar eclipse, and we're going to talk about the Venus Cazimi, which took place a few days before this lunation. It's a special one. It's a very auspicious Venus Cazimi. And then after we talk about all that, we'll also do some rituals, some tarot, a little meditation. We'll then get to connect in for a deep dive conversation with a young adult novelist, Kate Scelsa, who is a Scorpio Moon. And this is in honor of Scorpio's connection to emotional healing through esoteric and occult practices, because Kate recently wrote a book that will be coming out on the Taurus full moon. That is an anti-capitalist, pro-magic, and pro-personal empowerment guide for teens on how to creatively combat stress and depression. It's called Luminary, a magical guide to self-care. So we'll talk to Kate today after the new moon portion of the episode, and our talk is titled Stay Gently Empowered. So I have been recently inspired to find a phrase or a word or something that was said during the conversation as a title to the episode. So this episode is titled Stay Gently Empowered. And that phrase came from Kate sharing about their journey with queer parenting. Kate's a Cancer sun with Scorpio Moon. So if you're interested in exploring queer parenthood, mental health, magical practices, if you are a writer and looking for inspiration from someone who is successful at publishing books, then you'll want to stick around for that combo. Announcements from me before we get into this episode. Well, one last thing about Kate, I'm just seeing in the notes here. We also listened to a song from Kate's band, which is called The Witch Ones, and the song is titled The Tower, which is inspired by the tarot card, which is quite appropriate because the Tower connects us to Mars, which is Scorpio's traditional ruling planet. And so actually you can go ahead and get some tarot cards out. The cards connected to Scorpio are the Death card, Scorpio soul growth, so you might want to place that one out. The Tower, which is connected to Mars, Scorpio's traditional ruling planet. You could take out Judgment, which is connected to Pluto, Scorpio's modern ruling planet. And I usually use the King of Cups to represent fixed water for Scorpio. So those would be the Scorpio energies to work with. But this new moon is also hanging out with Venus. So Venus is in Scorpio, and just a few days before this new moon, the Sun and Venus aligned in Libra. So you could take the Empress out, and you could also take Justice out for Libra. And if you're feeling extra expansive and cosmic, you could take the Star card out too, because this is the Venus star point. So a lot of cards here for us to meditate on. And as you get those prepared, I will update you on some announcements here. So this past week, I was invited on the Spiritual Gaze podcast. The hilarious and insightful Brandon Alter and Angel Lopez had me on to talk about the Scorpio eclipse season. So if this episode is not enough for you and you want more, we chatted about all things transformation and also how to reclaim Scorpio elements in our lives through Taurus embodiment. Taurus is the polar sign to Scorpio. So there's a link in the show notes to that. In addition, I just want to remind you that if you ever want to look along with these podcast episodes, I release a newsletter in tandem with them on the new and the full moon. And the newsletter is essentially a layout and a script to the podcast that also includes images for you to look along with. So that's always there for you. And there's a link in the show notes to sign up for the newsletter. I think that's all the announcements I have for us today. So why don't we go ahead and transition to connecting to our body and our breath as we begin to tune into this Scorpio new moon partial solar eclipse. So take a deep, nourishing inhale into the body. Every time that we gather, I will always carve out some space for us to bring this cosmic practice of astrology into the body. This has been so important on my journey with astrology, and actually my relationship to astrology came out of my relationship to my body. It was through the breath, creating spaciousness within the body, that I began to slow down enough to sense into the energies that were available to me. And so as we connect to Scorpio, I invite you into the parts of the body that Scorpio is connected to. This is the reproductive organs, the bladder, the inner hips, the anus, the womb, everything down here in this sacred region of the body, often referred to as the sacral chakra, would be the energetic center here, which is often associated with the color orange. So perhaps you breathe the color orange into these parts of the body. And then as you exhale, you could release any stagnation, shame, guilt, fear, hurt that you're storing here in this part of the body. So breathing orange into this sacral region, inviting creativity into your life, desire, pleasure, and then as you exhale, releasing shame, guilt, fear. So this color orange I always find really resonant with Scorpio. I think the leaves on the trees have this color, the pumpkins this time of year, also the sacral chakra. There's something about this vibrant orange that seems to connect us to Scorpio. And so as we connect to these Scorpio body parts, I want you to bring to mind a stove where you could light a fire. And so this is going to bring us into the words that we have for this lunation. So each time we gather, I offer 3 phrases, and these 3 phrases are sometimes traditional phrases associated with the zodiac sign. Sometimes they are more intuitive. And for this Scorpio new moon, I think a little bit more metaphorical or poetic, we could say. Something about tuning into the water signs often bring out the more intuitive, poetic words. So there's many ingredients at play on this Scorpio new moon. There's a lot of spicy powers at play this whole Scorpio season. And so when tuning into the Scorpio new moon, the best way to encapsulate all of the energy, it felt important to bring to mind a metaphor. And so the phrases we have are I ignite, I simmer, I brew. I ignite, I simmer, I brew. And so these three phrases, you could pull a tarot card for each of them to elaborate on them. You could fill in the blank. They also could act as inspiration for conversation with other people or with yourself. I also recently have had artists start to tag me on Instagram with these phrases. These phrases could inspire your creative process, which actually feels quite Scorpio to do. And they can also become a mantra for you to repeat to yourself. I ignite, I simmer, I brew. So let's start with I ignite. Scorpio brings with it a certain edge, a passion, a desire. It is our water sign ruled by Mars. So imagine yourself at a gas stove. This is where the metaphor comes into play. Imagine yourself at a gas stove. Scorpio rules over gasoline and anything that comes from the ground or from the underworld. So imagine here at this stove that you turn on the dial to high, and that clicking sound of the stove lets you know that the burner is ready to be lit. You prepare to bring a pot of water to boil. This is where we find ourselves on this new moon, right here at the beginning of Scorpio eclipse season. We are in a place of initiation, of preparation, of igniting. Energies in us and around us are beginning to heighten because we're entering into eclipse season. So passions are lit, things are heating up. And so just know that as we move into eclipse season, that it can be a time where things feel a bit more heightened. But I'm hoping that this image of being at the stove helps you to channel it, because for some of us, I mean, you know, when you turn on that burner, the dial to high, and sometimes gas just leaks. This is something we want to be mindful of in our own life. Toxic patterns could be leaking at this time in our life and also in the world around us. So just being mindful of the environments that we choose to put ourselves in, the people that we're choosing to engage with. Scorpio as a fixed water sign is about setting really clear fixed boundaries emotionally with other people, fixed water. And also just being mindful of, like, when we have the stove on, that we don't want to burn ourselves. We need to be mindful of any loose pieces of paper or things that might be around. So it is a powerful place to be for transformation and alchemy, but it is also a place to practice with caution and care. So yes, things are heating up. This is where we are. I ignite. This is Scorpio new moon. I simmer is our next word, our phrase. I simmer. And so imagine that the water comes to a boil and the stove dial is turned to low, bringing the water to a simmer. So I'm going to connect this to Mars stationing retrograde. Mars stations retrograde on October 30th. So let's rewind a little bit. Scorpio's ruling planet, the traditional ruling planet, Mars, entered Gemini earlier this year on August 20th. This is August 20th, 2022. So since Mars entered Gemini, what has been stirred up in your life over the last couple of months? Mars in Gemini brings with it an extra impulse towards communication, towards mental processes. And in its challenging aspects, Mars in Gemini can have a scattering effect. It could be very distracted. It could bring confrontation, which is Mars, to relationships. Gemini is a social energy. especially those relationships that are platonic or sibling-like in nature, which is what Gemini rules over. Mars can also, in challenging aspects, bring aggravation. This could be aggravation to short-term travel, which Gemini is connected to. Actually, my parked car outside of my home was hit by a delivery truck this past week. And I was connecting that to Mars and Gemini in my life. That's one way that I've experienced it. And then this retrograde period will actually be my process of getting that vehicle fixed. Things are delayed right now in the world, so that Mars retrograde does indicate some delay. So aggravation to short-term travel. This could be also in our immediate surroundings with our neighbors, our immediate community, with people who represent duality to us. So yeah, what is Mars and Gemini stirred up? What is Mars and Gemini bringing us in its supporting aspects? Mars and Gemini directs ambition. This is Mars towards meeting new people, heading in new directions. Mars and Gemini initiates excitement around new ideas. This can be through writing, through communication, through connection. It can be a time where you're reconnecting with soul twins, best friends, meeting new people coming into your life that are also representing the evolution of you through shared interest, shared dialogue. So I'm bringing this up because on October 30th, Mars stations retrograde. And this is the part of Scorpio season where the water comes to a boil. We're reaching the height of Mars's direct motion through Gemini. But then as Mars stations retrograde, the stove dial, we need to turn to low to bring the water to a simmer. So it's interesting that this image is what's coming to us for Scorpio season. And Scorpio almost has this feeling where it's like you really have to drop in and tune into the energy, that in order to communicate about it, it only makes sense for me to communicate about it in this sort of way. But this is a powerful time. You know, it's interesting when you bring boiling water to a simmer, it's not necessarily that things slow down as Mars stations retrograde. Don't mistake the low flame as a weakening of its power. Actually, when the water simmers, it's really an indicator that the magic is ready to ensue. So during the Mars retrograde transit, this is a time where we can start the brew, which is our next phrase. And so this Mars retrograde brings a certain simmering effect this Scorpio season for internal change, alchemical transformation to occur. It feels really powerful, actually. So, yes, I ignite, I simmer, I brew. So a little recap before we get to I brew. This Scorpio New Moon, we ignite the flame to the stove and we begin to boil our water. As Mars stations retrograde, and that's Sunday, October 30th, so essentially as we're crossing into November, we bring the water to a simmer. And then throughout Scorpio season, and then particularly on the Taurus full moon, which is Tuesday, Mars's day, November 8th, we are offered space to add ingredients into the pot, our witch's cauldron, so to speak, to begin the brew. So what within desires healing and transformation at this time? This is a question for us to reflect on this Scorpio New Moon. And throughout all of Scorpio season, there's something particular about this Scorpio New Moon eclipse. The fact that it's starting right here at the beginning of Scorpio season. The Scorpio New Moon is found at 2 degrees of Scorpio. It is initiating our time into Scorpio season and into eclipse season. It is igniting our time. So the work that we're doing here on this new moon is setting the tone for the rest of Scorpio season. So again, the question for us to consider, what within desires healing and transformation? Things are beginning to brew. Long-held emotions come up during Scorpio season. Memories, traumas, past traumas may resurface throughout eclipse season. And Scorpio invites us to hold space for all of it with fierce love and compassion. This is a time to forgive the past, to forgive yourself. Whatever you are holding on to that isn't yours, It's time to let go of. What are you holding on to that isn't yours? Is it other people's emotions? Other people's judgments? Are you holding on to other people's secrets? Some of this could be connected to family. There is Pallas and Black Moon Lilith currently in Cancer. Some of this could be connected to spirit. Neptune's in Pisces right now. So we have, throughout Scorpio season, there are going to be water trines taking place, and even a grand water trine will take place. And I'll explore that more on the Taurus full moon because we'll be getting closer to that. But whatever you're holding on to, let that shit go. This is what Scorpio teaches us. Pull back the layers of grief. Breathe into the lungs. Honor the natural rhythm of death and rebirth. Cleanse your space. Open yourself up to receiving insights for creative transformation. This is all available to us on this new moon and throughout all of Scorpio season. Pay attention to your dreams. Shed the shame you carry around your sexuality. Shed the shame you carry around your desires. This is the time of year where we are gifted this opportunity to turn darkness into light. You are beautiful. You are sacred. You are whole. Breathe that into the body. Breathe that into Scorpio's body parts. You are beautiful. You can say, I am beautiful. I am sacred. I am whole. So what are we cooking up? What within desires healing and transformation? This is a question we ask, but what are we cooking up? What's here in this brew? So the transformations brewing have likely been transpiring underneath the surface over the past year. It's not just Scorpio season. Scorpio season brings this up to a head where we can start that process, but things have been brewing over the past year with the south node of fate moving through the fixed water sign of Scorpio. Meanwhile, the north node of fate has been moving through the fixed earth sign of Taurus. And so the nodes of fate, on a practical level, they indicate to us the eclipse axis. So this is why we have the south node in Scorpio, the north node in Taurus. So we have each been moving through a portal of death and rebirth this entire year as the Scorpio south node has been transiting through our chart. So any placements you have in Scorpio have been moving through a deep reset. The Scorpio parts of our heart and our chart are moving through a deep reset, a deep cleanse. Whatever is being cleared out, we may not be fully conscious of at this time. And that's okay because Scorpio is a deeply unconscious sign and energy. But during Scorpio season, as the sun consciousness moves through Scorpio, as the sun moves through Scorpio, we become more conscious of all of these themes that have been transpiring. And sometimes that can be painful. Sometimes that can be like an awakening. So whatever it is is being cleared out, it's connected to the last 18 and a half years of accumulation. Why 18 and a half years? This is the last time that the south node of fate moved through Scorpio. So be gentle with this process. Things could be coming up from 18 and a half years ago. And a new you is preparing to emerge. You're preparing to step into your power, Scorpio, into your psychic and intuitive abilities, into your healing and transformational abilities more than ever before. And it is a process. We cannot rush this sort of thing, although eclipse season can bring a accumulation to that. So as we approach the Taurus full moon, which is a total lunar eclipse, this is when we reach a heightened moment of Scorpio season, and it's on election day here in the United States. So that's just something to be aware of collectively. But be mindful of what you add into the cauldron over Scorpio season. Let's not add in toxic ingredients. Let go of the outdated ingredients that no longer serve you. We're letting go of shame, guilt, fear, and judgments. And instead, we're adding in the practical Taurian ingredients. We're being invited towards the north node, adding in connection to nature, things that offer deeper healing to the themes that you are moving through in your life right now. Add in a splash of that Taurus hard work and desire. Sprinkle in a connection to the five senses, to beauty, to art. Sprinkle in prayers for humanity while you're at it. Include healing herbs and plant allies in this cauldron. And also seek support from people who play very Scorpio-like roles in the world. This is from the tarot, any therapist, this is Scorpio, healers, and then people who are also playing Taurian roles for us, herbalists, people who work with the earth, body workers. So be intuitive with this process of what you're cooking up over Scorpio season. And as a backdrop to all that is brewing, just a few other things. On October 22nd, there was a Venus Cazimi that occurred at the final degree of Libra, adding in an extra dose of love and beauty into our cauldron that we're brewing. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then on Thursday, which is Jupiter's day, following this new moon, Thursday, October 27th, Jupiter re-enters Pisces. This brings an extra spoonful of magic, imagination, dreams, mystery, psychic visions, and karmic release to the mix. And Jupiter will remain in Pisces throughout Scorpio and Sagittarius season. So we get 2 months of Jupiter in Pisces before it re-enters Aries around the winter solstice. So it's a very witchy, watery next 2 months. And so let's gently feed the simmering waters. Remember, Scorpio heats up water. And so let's gently feed the simmering waters within. And then come the next Scorpio full moon, which is May 5th, 2023, 6 months from now. On this Scorpio full moon, it's the final Scorpio lunar eclipse of this 1.5 year Scorpio South Node transit. And so whatever transformations you're cooking up this year will likely be close to being brewed and ready to share by May of next year. Although it may be until the South Node of Fate leaves Scorpio altogether and enters the sign of Libra. The nodes of Fate move in retrograde motion, and that will be on July 17th of 2023. The South Node enters Libra and the North Node enters Aries. And so it may be until then that we are fully given the space to reflect on all of the healing transformations. So Scorpio New Moon blessings to you. This Scorpio New Moon, again, it's a partial solar eclipse. The exact date is Tuesday, which is Mars's day, quite appropriate, October 25th, 2022, at 3:48 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's found at exactly 2 degrees and 0 minutes of Scorpio in your chart. So you could look to your chart to add an additional meditation to this eclipse energy. So I said I wanted to talk to you about the Venus Cazimi too. So let's take a moment to allow all of the new moon and the Scorpio season, eclipse season invitations to settle into the body. Let's allow ourselves to marinate in that for a bit as we transition into talking about the Venus Cazimi. So as spicy as Scorpio season is, there's also this really beautiful auspicious alignment that took place just a few days before this Scorpio new moon that sets a tone for us for this Scorpio season to lean into. So it's often referred to as a Venus star point or a Venus Cazimi, which is when the sun, Venus and the sun align in the sky. And so Cazimi translates to in the heart of the sun. And so this conjunction of Venus and the sun, it occurs about every 9 months. So it's not necessarily a rare occurrence. However, this particular Venus Cazimi has been highly anticipated as it's the first of its kind in quite some time. So after roughly 100 years of Venus star points in Scorpio, this conjunction meets in Libra, opening up a new century-long chapter of Venus star points in this Venusian-ruled sign. And so Venus and the Sun aligned at the 29 degrees and 27 minutes of Libra. So you can look to this point in your chart to see where and what is being bestowed with blessings from Venus at this time. Again, to meditate on this, you could take out the Empress in the tarot, which is connected to Venus. You could take out Justice, which is Libra's card. You could also take out the Star card for honoring the Venus star point. So this is the Venus star points, the Venus Cazimis, and particularly when it shifts into a new sign, represents a shift in the collective culture. Venus does connect us to things like fashion, cultural trends, things like that. And in a recent talk that Chris Brennan had on their podcast, the astrology podcast, there was an example of how Venus star points relate to larger cultural movements. So there was just this 2.5 hour episode that was released on Venus star points that I recommend checking out. But on that episode, they were talking about how Venus star points occurred in Sagittarius. This was 200 years ago, and the most popular form of transportation was by horses at that time, which is an animal associated with Sagittarius, the centaur, half horse, half human. And then as Venus Cazimis were taking place in Scorpio over that 100-year time period, it was more focused on gasoline-fueled vehicles. And again, Scorpio is connected to gas and the underworld. And so they were making a prediction that as the Venus star points join in Libra over the next 100 years, that there will be more of a focus towards electric cars. What's interesting is that there will be one more Venus star point in Scorpio in 4 years from now. So it'll go back to the 0 degree of Scorpio. It's at the 29 degrees of Libra right now. And then in 8 years from now, the Venus star point will completely shift into Libra for that new 100-year chapter. So we're kind of straddling this dance. So perhaps in 8 years, we'll see a shift towards electric cars. That could be an example. And I'm just thinking about the spike in gas prices right now and how fuel is becoming a little bit more limited for us, and we're being pushed to shift in new ways towards the air element. That's been reflective of a lot of things happening. The Saturn and Jupiter conjunction back at the end of 2020. Pluto is preparing to enter Aquarius next spring or late winter. So there's a lot of shifts going into air. Uranus will enter Gemini in a few years. So I digress. Let's connect back to this Venus Cazimi. And Libra already took place on October 22nd, again, just a few days before the Scorpio New Moon eclipse. And a portal has been opened into greater love, beauty, harmony, and balance. This is all Libra. This is both within you and in the world around you. Let's not forget the Libra themes of social justice, equality, relationship. So if you are resonating with the themes of the Venus star point, I encourage you to tune into it, and you might find that you're bathed with this beautiful energy. I invite you to bask in that light. I invite you to connect to the star card and the tarot. And so as the first new moon to follow this auspicious conjunction, this week feels like a powerful time to drop into a meditation with Venus. I'd also like to include something special that I noted, that Haumea. This is an important and magical side note. The planetoid Haumea was also at 29 degrees of Libra at the moment of the Venus Cazimi. And Haumea is the creation goddess of the islands of Hawaii. And astrologically, she rules over fertility, childbirth, and the creation of new earth. So there's also this message coming through for us right now. It's encouraging us to live more in alignment with Mother Earth, having the Sun, Venus, and Haumea all line up at the 29 degrees of Libra. So for some of you, particularly those who have placements around the 29 degrees of Libra, or anything that's making an aspect to this point, you are being invited to step in to this new role as someone who is here to bring greater healing to this planet. And again, although this Cazimi has already taken place, a portal has been opened in this first new moon, and also we have the next 100 years to really connect to it. But as we are shifting into this new 100-year chapter of Venus Cazimis and Libra, this is a powerful time to drop into a meditation with Venus and Haumea. So to activate and awaken this in your own life, again, you could place these tarot cards out, but also place out any crystals, plants, sacred objects, or offerings that connect you to offering hopes and wishes for the future of this planet. It's a time to invite fertility into your life, creation, beauty, abundance, time to invite greater love into your life, and also for the collective. So I'd like to remind you that in 2022, this year, there have been 2 conjunctions between the Sun and Venus. The first one occurred in Capricorn on January 8th, and this was Venus retrograde. And so that was more of an underworld descent. Venus transitioning to being a morning star. And this was around reassessing the structures, terms, and conditionings of our relationships. Now, this second conjunction has occurred here in Libra on October 22nd. And this is Venus direct, Venus transitioning to an evening star. And this is a return from the underworld. So this is bringing us greater clarity, which is the return from the underworld, but also Libra, greater clarity, perspective, peace, and balance in relationships. And so if something magical about Venus is if you track the 5 consecutive Venus Cazimis, you will notice that this planet forms a 5-pointed pentagram in the sky. And so you can always find the pentagram in your own natal chart by looking at the 3 conjunctions between the Sun and Venus that occurred before your birthday, and then the 2 conjunctions that occurred after. And then you apply it to your birth chart. And if you would like help to locate this sacred pentagram in your chart, I'd be happy to help you. And you could put in the notes when you book a reading that you're interested in focusing on the Venus Cazimi pentagram in your chart. And so you might sense that this Venus Cazimi has really set a beautiful tone for Scorpio eclipse season. So I encourage you to also focus on this star point as an ally and as a way to help navigate what may feel at some certain times heightened energy of eclipse season. For me, I really connect Venus to nature, and spending time in nature is so imperative to my mental health. And this past Libra season, I really soaked up a lot of the autumnal nature views as much as possible. And so if you're able, I encourage you to continue to connect to your body, to nature, to the 5 senses as we continue to move through Scorpio season. Then we'll have the Taurus full moon, which Taurus is ruled by Venus. So I'll probably be reminding you about this Venus star point again in the coming weeks. But for now, I think we're ready to get into our conversation with Kate Scelsa, which will reconnect us to the invitations of this Scorpio new moon. Again, my name is Jeff Henshaw. Thanks, as always, for tuning into this podcast. This show would not be possible without you. So if you find it helpful, please pass it along to anyone that you think might benefit from this information. And if you'd like to leave reviews or comments, you can always do that there in the show notes. And I'll often take this as an opportunity to look at the reviews when recording a podcast episode. And so I'll read the most recent review. It says, Jeff is truly a gift with a sparkle emoji. 5 stars. This is what this person writes. I've been listening to Jeff's podcast for the last couple years and always find such wisdom and peace when I listen to Cosmic Cousins. Jeff also did a natal chart reading for me that was so informative and enlightening, and looking forward to getting more readings from them in the future. Thank you for sharing your voice and gift with us, Jeff. Thank you. That is a really nice review to receive, and it makes me feel really happy to connect with you all in this way. It is truly an honor to be here with you. I'm so grateful for this platform that we have co-created together, and I hope in some way that whatever I share with you on each lunation offers you a ripple effect of healing in your life. And then I hope that you pay that forward to those in your life If you do have the desire to work with me more intimately, I do offer readings, both astrology and tarot readings. And I have new spots opening up for one-on-one deep dive mentorships coming up this January into the new year. We're transitioning into 2023 soon, which will be the Chariot year. The tarot year card is the Chariot. So we'll be talking about that in the coming months. But for now, I think that we're ready to transition into our conversation with Kate Scelsa. And so let's transition into that now. So today with us on Cosmic Cousins, I'm super excited to introduce you to, if you don't already know them, but Kate Scelsa is on the podcast with us today. And Kate and I go back to 2015. Was it 2015?
Yep.
We did the Fool's Journey together. We were on a sacred ritual from the Fool all the way to the world. So we gathered each week together. So we're like family. We're soul family from that experience. But I'd like to read the little bio that's on the back of Kate's new book, just to introduce you. So Kate Scelsa is a novelist, playwright, and witch. Her debut young adults novel, Fans of the Impossible Life, was a 2016 Rainbow List Top 10 pick and has been published in 10 languages. She is also the author of the young adult novel, Improbable Magic for Cynical Witches. Her play, Everyone's Fine with Virginia Woolf, has been produced in New York and Dublin and was published by the Dramatist Play Service. And you can hear her band, The Witch Ones, wherever you listen to music. I wonder if we'll get to listen to some of that today. Kate currently lives in upstate New York with her wife in an only slightly haunted house. And now with your wife and your young one.
Yeah, my baby, Frida Joe.
Frida Joe, who's a Leo with Aquarius moon, Kate Bush. Bush's combo.
Yeah, which I love that you knew that. That makes me, I can already see it. I can already see the tiny Kate Bush emerging.
Yeah. So last that we had talked, you were just talking about purchasing a new home in upstate. And so a lot has unfolded over the last few years.
Yeah.
And just congratulations to all this expanse.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're gathering today in honor of the Scorpio New Moon eclipse. It's the solar eclipse, which we've had this eclipse axis active over the last year. The north node's been in Taurus and the south node's been in Scorpio. So it is a transformative time for Scorpios, people with Scorpio energy, which is part of the reason why I asked you for the Scorpio New Moon, because you have your moon in Scorpio.
Yes.
Would you be willing to share with us your sun, moon, rising?
Yes. Cancer sun, Libra rising, Scorpio moon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Double water with air. So there's a thing that we like to do on Cosmic Cousins. I call it personal myth making, but it's where you make a little story with the sun, moon, rising. So I'll just remind you yours, and we'll see if it brings up a memory or just connects you to any part of yourself. So Cancer sun, the sun is the character of the story. So the nurturing crab is the Cancer sun. The moon is the backdrop. So Scorpio moon and the shadowy darkness of night. And then Libra rising is, well, what are we doing? We're ensuring that the revolution will be peaceful. So it's the nurturing crab and the shadowy darkness of night, ensuring the revolution will be peaceful.
Oh, I love it. I love that so much. Yeah, that kind of sums it up.
Yeah, I was seeing this introduction that you did to your new book, Luminary, on Instagram. This was what you wrote. You described this book as, so the title, Luminary, a magical guide to self-care, just so we know, will be out on November 8th on the full moon. But this is what you wrote. You said you're anti-capitalist, pro-magic, and pro-personal empowerment guide for teens on how to creatively combat stress and depression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I felt the anti-capitalist coming in with the Libra rising, the justice component of your offering. And then, of course, it's so esoteric and occult, which feels very Scorpio, and just the ability to combat stress and depression. I could connect to both Cancer and Scorpio, and just kind of looking out for the teens. I think Cancer has a love for all children in our community. So I feel your big three coming in strong, which we're going to look at your whole chart today. But yeah, I just wanted to check in about the sun, moon, rising and see if the personal myth brought up any memories for you, or what it feels like to even read your own little description of the book.
Well, I love relating the top three and that myth idea to this book, because I think this book really, as you're saying, sums that up completely. Because this book is my reaction to writing fiction for young adults and having young adults contact me because some of the writing about depression, about mental health in the novels was really speaking to them. And just from that, starting to feel this very Cancer mothering feeling towards these readers and these young people who are going through this, insane epidemic of a complete mental health crisis, and feeling so lost that a situation that the pandemic has only made worse and made everyone feel so much more isolated. And you can only imagine what it could be like right now, trying to be in high school or be in college and dealing with that. So this was very much my big mama, big sister, let me tell you what I've learned, children. Coming from now the middle of my life, I have enough to say that has helped me that I want to share with them. And talk about my Scorpio moon. I mean, that has been embracing my Scorpio moon and embracing these esoteric practices for me has been my saving grace of my life. And so I wanted to be able to bring these more esoteric things into a really practical realm of saying, witchy ceremony, tarot, astrology, energy work. It's all magical and beautiful and fun and ethereal. But then how do we use it in a really practical way in everyday situations? And so much of this growth really happened for me around the Brooklyn Fools and around us doing that work with the tarot, and me seeing the potential in what role magic could play in my life.
Yeah, this practical side is reminding us of the earth element that balances the water. And so just being a double water, Cancer, Sun, Scorpio, Moon, it is important for you to have that practical component to make it real, so that it's not just spiritual and emotional and just kind of flowing around without some sort of form. And even just having a book is this is something physical that we can hold. And you do have quite a bit of earth. You have Virgo energy. You have Jupiter in Virgo in your chart and Saturn in Virgo. And so there is this commitment to work and showing up through service and practicality that's present in your chart for sure. But I'm just trying to just even consider what it would be like to be a teenager and to be able to pick this book up, because you really outline your own healing journey in such a really cool way. So there's a chapter for each of your own modalities that you've used throughout your life, including tarot and astrology, which a lot of the listeners of the podcast are coming here for that. But you have a chapter for witchcraft, energy and spirit guides, body, therapy, mindfulness, and creativity.
Yeah.
So it's for young adults, but also I felt a lot of comfort in connecting with it. And I think that it could be for anyone.
Yeah.
Really? Because the way that you write it, it's almost like we get to know you and your story. It feels a bit like a memoir in some ways, but also like a guide book too. So you start out in the introduction, and I was really fascinated by this. If I remember correctly, this whole journey is started with a birth chart reading that you received.
Yep.
Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. Yeah. My aunt is a witch and came to witchcraft through Catholicism. And that was sort of her rejection of traditional religion, was she turned to witchcraft. And I was always really interested in what she was doing. You know, she had her a little cauldron. She had her pentagram, like she had all her things I wanted to know about. And so I would always ask her about it. And so she really liked to indulge me and sort of let me know about things. And as a gift for my college graduation, she gave me my first natal chart reading at this little New Age store in Red Bank, New Jersey, that was, deeply unhip. And I walked in and immediately was sort of embarrassed for myself, because I had gone through this experience of loving magic and fairies and all things New Age and cheesy and crystals when I was a kid. And like a lot of us, felt very self-conscious about that as a teenager. And that's all very uncool, and we don't wear fairy wings, and, I'm not interested in that kind of thing. So I walked into the store with this gift certificate that she had given me for a reading. And the astrologer took me in the back. I thought it would be sort of funny. I was like, oh, this will be funny. He'll, tell my fortune and give vague predictions about life and love and career. And he recorded it. This was almost 20 years ago. He recorded it on an old school, tape recorder. And he said to me before he started, "You're going to want to listen to this again later." Mm. And I thought, oh, this will be funny. Maybe I could use it for an art project where I'm, making fun of it or something. And he proceeded in this tiny little back room in a very, unremarkable New Age store to completely change my life. And I had been struggling with depression. I had just graduated from college. I was living in New York City. It was 2002. I was completely stressed out. I was stressed out living in the city. Mm-hmm. I felt somehow like a failure, even though I hadn't even started my life. And I just had been to a bunch of therapists and felt completely like there was something irreparably wrong with me. Mm. And I was sort of desperately searching for answers. And I found all of them that afternoon. Mm. And I don't think, I'm trying to find that tape because I really want to go back now and listen to it. I think he was a good astrologer. I don't think he was, the greatest astrologer in the world, but the things that he said to me that day completely blew my mind. And the takeaway was mostly this: you are supposed to be this way. It was permission. It was, you are this watery, emotional person. You are someone who has to ride these waves of feelings, and you are sensitive to your environment, and you might be more sensitive to your environment than other people, and that's okay. And this was unheard of to me, that could just be the end of that sentence, and that's okay. I had never, ever given myself permission to think that way before. Mm-hmm. And so that started it. And then it was over the years of getting readings from lots of different people. And then once I started playing with tarot and sort of had the tools in my own hands, mm-hmm. it became I became empowered by it. Because before, I love receiving readings. That to me is so magical and so fantastic, but it always felt like magic that someone else possessed that they could share with me. And once I had the magic in my own hands and saw that I could provide myself with wisdom and guidance, all bets were off. And I was back to full on, empowered witch self.
Yes. That self-empowerment. Yeah. First off, thank you for sharing your experience. And it's so nice to know, because I've known you for years and I don't think I ever fully knew that. And so just like reading your book has allowed me to get closer to you and more intimate with you. And it's very relatable too. I have a very similar start to my journey too, where I just felt really disconnected from any kind of, I had a degree in psychology and I felt really disconnected to it because it was missing the esoteric, occult, spiritual, magical side of the practices. And so once I found astrology, things just opened up for me, and it empowered me to step into my purpose, my truth, and gave me permission to lean into certain traits that maybe society had told me weren't okay to embody. And I think a lot of the water element kind of gets ignored by our society. The emotional, the intuitive aspects aren't given as much permission to be embodied. So thank you for all that reflection. And you said once you got your hands on a tarot deck, that was like when you had this moment of, there was like a shift in your journey. I felt that from what you were saying. What was the deck? Do you remember?
Well, it was the Wild Unknown, and it was actually with the Brooklyn Fools. It was with you guys. And I had done a lot of work with body healing and energy healing up until that point, and dealing with chronic illness. But I still sort of put it in this realm. I didn't feel fully magical yet, I guess it's like an easy way of putting it. And I even signed up to do the Brooklyn Fools, kind of just to have something fun to do. That my book was coming out in the fall. I was feeling really restless and just like I was sitting around waiting for something to happen. It was my first book. I was really nervous about it. And that year it was you and Bakara Wintner were running it together, and Bakara and I were good friends. And I thought, oh, this will be fun. A similar vibe to how I walked into that store. I mean, I wasn't dismissive, but I was like, oh, this will be a kick. I'll just do this. I'll do this tarot class. Why not? Yeah. And I mean, I think it was a few weeks in when we started, reading for each other maybe, or really starting to pull cards and look at them. All of a sudden, I realized I wasn't going to be staying on the sidelines of what this magical experience was, and started doing readings, and it coming through me in a way that I had never experienced before. So that shift, I really credit where I am now to that shift in 2015.
Yeah. I'm curious about, so since we were gathering for the Scorpio New Moon, and we're kind of focusing mostly on your Scorpio Moon in your chart, although we'll touch base on some other parts. Some of what I'm hearing, maybe even the cynical side can be kind of Scorpio. Totally. It's just very aware of what's going on in the world and can kind of read it for felt, we might say. Totally. But who is Scorpio without these kind of practices? Because Scorpio, when I think of Scorpio, I think of the ability to go into the depths, to bring about some sort of psychological healing. And so Scorpios aren't always drawn to esoteric and occult practices. They might be kind of cynical of them, but actually Scorpios can really benefit from these kind of practices, or just Scorpio energy in general. But I do have some Scorpios in my life who are also just like, nah, mm-mm. Totally. What do you feel has shifted for you having these kind of practices in your life in your Scorpio moon. Does it bring up anything for you, this kind of like push-pull between cynicism and also deep psychological healing?
Absolutely. And I think I had gone to a side of cynicism as a young adult and felt very dismissive of mystical practices. I mean, one of the things I write about in the book is I had a lot of fear as a child that was really difficult to understand because I had a really, really harmonious, very, privileged upbringing with very loving parents in a lovely home with there was no discord. And I had these very intense psychological reactions to darkness and actually to the occult and a lot of fear. I went to psychologists as a child because it was so upsetting to me. Mm. And one of the things that became clear to me in that reading in my early 20s was just, okay, this is from the Scorpio moon, this stuff. This is you picking up on these dark energies, on looking at, a dark night ahead of you and thinking there's a lot in this darkness that is affecting me. Mm-hmm. So I think once I realized that to look directly at that was going to be really freeing, and that these mystical practices and occult practices gave me the tools to look directly at the darkness. Literally look at the darkness. That helped me so quickly and was such an immediate relief that there was no question that it needed to become a huge part of my life. And that's something that I really hope is a takeaway from this book, is that whatever kind of darkness, literal darkness, mental health darkness, darkness in the world, there's only benefit to looking directly at it and trying to understand it and trying to see what's really going on there. And bypassing that is hurting you, is hurting our collective evolution, is keeping you from living your fullest life. I mean, that's a pretty big answer to your question, but I feel so strongly about it because it was so immediate for me, the relief that I had tools to look at those parts that Scorpio was going to dredge up anyway. There was no question that my Scorpio moon was going to be sifting through that darkness, whether I wanted it to or not. So then what do I do with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a few things are popping up for me when you're saying that. One of them, how powerful it is for you to then write this book, Luminary, because you said when you were a young adult, you actually used those words, which is this is a young adult book. When you were a young adult, you had a lot of maybe fear of even approaching that darkness. And so you having this book out in the world allows for anyone who maybe is also experiencing kind of fear, but also is mysteriously drawn to these practices too, that you approach it in a very down to earth and lighthearted way. Like there's also like fun, like stories in there of like you watching like the Great British Baking Show and things like that, that just sort of like relatable and kind of cut through that darkness in a way.
Yeah.
I actually always associate the Great British Baking Show to Taurus, actually. Like almost every Taurus season, I just watch a marathon of that show. Taurus is connected to baking and the earth. And so Taurus is the polar sign of Scorpio. So in a lot of ways, we need that balance between these two signs. So that was one thing that brought up when you were saying that. Another one was I had a memory of I gave a Scorpio a tarot reading once, and the death card showed up. And we know that this is Scorpio's soul growth card in the tarot. And I like from that moment up to that point, I always thought Scorpios would be like, hell yeah, death card. This is my card. Nah. And the visceral reaction that this Scorpio had when they saw the death card, they like almost like pushed the table away, where there was like this like fear to actually look at the death and what they needed to let go of. And, Scorpio can sometimes be like, till death do us part kind of energy, where it wants to hold on to the emotion and the memory. And, but Scorpio, this is a soul growth, learns to go through that process of death and rebirth. So I'm curious if you have any connection to the death card, because that's definitely something for us throughout Scorpio season on the Scorpio New Moon, just to gently put our death card out on an altar and spend some time with it. And you do also in the book, you kind of have this section where you look at each of the major arcana cards and you have a description for them. But yeah, so the death card, do you have any connection to it? Visceral reactions? Do you like the death card?
It has come up at some really key, very intense moments in my life, as has the Tower. And
also a Scorpio card.
Yeah.
Because Tower is connected to Mars, which is Scorpio's ruling planet.
Right.
So both for Scorpio altar, we can put death and the Tower out.
I mean, I think also these past few years have been, so much about death for all of us, for where we just are as a society. But I think, I do think that when the pandemic came around, a lot of death work had already happened for me in a way that I was prepared to let go of some things that I feel very grateful that I was ready to let go of them. And I was ready, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I had this crazy thing happen. It must have been, I can't remember how recently my cat had died when I spoke to you last, but my first cat died, who was really my familiar, in the fall of 2019. And it was I had such an extreme Scorpio reaction. It was so mystical and deep and went into past lives in a way that I've never experienced before. And I was just in the most incredible mourning that I did not try to curb. There was no controlling it. There was no saying, get your stuff together. This is just a cat. I was full on Scorpio, mourning with this cat. And it cleared something for me that then allowed so much else to fall away. And as sort of normal life and so many things about life that we had known fell away with the pandemic, I felt really strong in that, in a way that I think has a lot to do with like that kind of moon work, where I let myself go completely in. Which you can't do all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think when you have a really intense moon placement, sometimes letting yourself really go for it is good.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that.
The word that's coming to mind right now is initiation.
Absolutely.
When we move through these portals of grief or death, whether it's like the death of a loved one, the death of a pet, the death of a relationship, the death of our identity, the death of our society, whatever it is that we're moving through, it's an initiation. And that's a word I often think of with Scorpio. It is like the initiator. And there's something in that of what I heard you say is that as you had experienced that portal of, past life healing, that it cleared something in you so that when we started to move through the threshold of the global pandemic, you were almost like ready to step into it and to transform even more.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was completely how it felt, which was so bizarre because I see myself as this overly sensitive person who maybe sometimes feels quite delicate. And there was something that was not how I felt as we stepped into this. And I think that's also why this book came out of me in this moment, is because I was seeing how strong I felt, and that I felt really, really compelled to share that, and to at least say, these are the tools that are making me feel strong in this moment. This is why, and this is how, and just making that an offering of maybe if this can help somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The esoteric phrase for Scorpio, I think, reflects a lot of this. So there's an esoteric phrase for each of the 12 signs that were channeled by Alice Bailey, like in the early 1900s. But the Scorpio phrase is, warrior am I, and from the battle I emerged triumphant.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
And I hear that in what you're talking about. It's like the fierce water sign. Not that Cancer and Pisces aren't, because they have their own fierceness too, but it's ruled by Mars, and there is this kind of warrior quality to Scorpio, of that, almost like that intensity of going into the underworld and coming back out, that kind of feeling.
Yeah, that's how I have felt recently, is I have felt like I'm back from the underworld and I have things to report.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that.
And there's a sense of ancestral healing that it brings up for me too. When you're talking about that fear of the darkness, or maybe the fear of the occult, or whatever the shadows are, how much of that is ancestral? How much of that is connected to a deeper knowing that you'll be shedding parts of your conditioning so that you can emerge into your sexuality, Scorpio sexuality, into your power, all of these layers of Scorpio that we might have fear around it. But, you are also someone who we look up into in the community as someone who is an author and a writer who's sharing these esoteric occult practices in Luminary. And also you are publicly out as a queer person. So there's also the sexual side of this too. Have you considered your Scorpio moon and your relationship to your sexuality?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I think that sexuality and creativity, I think that, especially because the placement is my moon, it's all those hidden selves, that then how much of that hidden self are you sharing with the world, and how are you sharing that hidden self with the world? I mean, I understand it best through my creativity, because the things that I have written that felt the most related to my Scorpio moon, and the most sort of forbidden, and things I sat, alone at my laptop in my room thinking, I can never show this to anyone. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that now I look back and are the best things I've written. Those are the things that made the books I wrote compelling and connect emotionally with readers. And especially writing about queerness, writing about queer characters, feeling like I didn't ever want to censor myself or hold back about, sexuality, which is complicated. Of course, when you're writing for teenagers, there's a lot of association that I have there. But that was another big lesson for me in looking at my Scorpio self, was because my creativity benefited so much from me allowing darkness and complicated feelings in. It was, again, undeniable that I had to learn to use this part of myself as a tool, because that's where the good stuff is.
Yeah. And I think that it's important too to acknowledge that with all Scorpio themes, Scorpio is a deeply private sign. So when we're talking about sexuality, it is something that's private. And when we're talking about like our relationship to witchcraft or the esoteric and occult, this is also something that's very private. It's why there's like underground communities of witches who gather together. There's something in the sacredness of the container that Scorpio creates that it's not necessarily always meant to be shared with everyone. So it's interesting for us to also know that we need to share these things and let them out. Some people call it the broom closet, like coming out of the broom closet, or just like coming out of the closet as a queer person. We also need to bring it into the light too. And that if we stay hidden in the themes of Scorpio, it can also manifest into shame or into fear and all of these things. So these themes are all alive for us during Scorpio season. We get the opportunity to connect with them in a new way. And my eye is kind of going over to, you have the sun in Cancer trying the moon in Scorpio. So I want to check in with your Cancer sun, but you also have Venus in Gemini as well. And, you know, Gemini is also about light and dark like Scorpio, but Gemini wants to talk about the light and the dark, whereas Scorpio might want to keep the darkness to themselves and go through their own internal process. So that Venus in Gemini for sure is like this writer side of you that's like, well, let's write a book about it. It's also in the 9th house, which is the house of publishing, connecting to the world at large. So Venus in Gemini has a message to share with everyone. And I've also included the asteroids. I'm going to share the screen with you. The listeners won't be able to see it, but it might be just nice. I don't know if we've talked about the asteroids. Did we do that when we looked at your chart last?
I can't remember now. Maybe not.
You have Ceres next to Venus and Gemini, and Ceres is the mother who's harvesting. So it's connected to just hard work, but also of like creating things, you know, whether that's children or books or whatever it is. So Venus is over here harvesting and working hard, has a little bit of a Virgo energy series. So I see that over here. And then you also have the sun in Cancer in the 10th house, your public appearance, the way that we see you in the world. And then you have Mercury up there, the writer, retrograde, that's going deep into their writing. And then Vesta is 1 degree from your Mercury in Cancer. And Vesta is the priestess that is connected to ritual and is the keeper of the flame, like lights a candle, wakes up early, has a ritual, has an altar. So it's like the writer waking up to their ritual. I'm saying writer because of Mercury, but we're writing and communicating about the things that are maybe a little bit more sensitive, maybe a little bit more intuitive. So we have all of this up here that is very public oriented, whereas a Scorpio moon actually may want to be a little bit more kept to itself. But we can see how maybe this moon in Scorpio trine the sun in Cancer in the 10th house is wanting to bring it out to the public and for the community healing. Yeah. So does this bring up anything for you looking at this top part of your chart?
Absolutely. I mean, it makes sense to me. It's not comfortable. I do think if the top part of my chart wasn't going off the way it does, I think my Scorpio moon would be perfectly happy to experience all of this in private. And there is this pull to bring all of that up and out to the public. And it's interesting to me, especially, it did feel vulnerable in this book, you know, talking in the first person in memoir style about my experience with mental health and with these practices. And yet even as vulnerable as that felt, I felt totally compelled to do it, and almost compelled to the point of channeling. I mean, I've never written anything more quickly in my life. And so, yes, I often feel very much that sort of deep, dark little witch self is being pulled out into the light a little bit against her will sometimes, but she does it.
Mm-hmm.
But I completely relate to that. Yep.
Yeah. And that would be where an own astrology practice could come in to play, where you get to meditate on the current transits and you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of planets in Scorpio right now. Maybe this is actually a time for me to be a little bit more within myself and go on that process. Maybe I'd be curious to see, when your cat passed away, what was going on with your Scorpio moon at that time. There might have been some sort of deeper transit. And if I'm remembering correctly, in the fall of 2019, Mars was in Scorpio. Mm-hmm. And I remember during that time, I was back in New York City just for like 3 months. And it was sort of my almost like my grief vacation in New York, where I was fully letting go of that part of my life. I'm remembering now, I was doing this 40-day ritual where I would take a red rose and walk down the Hudson River with it and take it to a tree. Like, I was just like mourning that whole decade of my life. Oh, so I'm just remembering that now, and Scorpio energy, it can be really intense like that, where it wants to really be with the emotion and be with the process of transformation. So, I love that you're bringing your cat up here for us, because the Scorpio New Moon is a time where we can honor our loved ones who have passed away. And so we're honoring your cat today. Yes. We're honoring my past self in New York, yes. That you want to put on the altar, that you're letting go of. This is the time of year that we do that. And we're supported by that energetically.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your cat's name?
LB.
LB.
And he was, he was just a remarkable little partner in life. And just had the most, I could cry even talking about him now. That's how emotional it is. And just the most intimate experience of death I've ever had. He was sick for a long time. And also that Scorpio clearing out of so many feelings about ourselves in the face of death. I think talk about my Scorpio moon and the Cancer sun having a relationship that, I had to go through this experience of feeling like, oh, I can't nurture him out of dying. I can't mother him out of this thing he has to go through. And that was brand new for me, and a pretty important lesson. My God. But yeah, it was definitely, I'll have to look at the chart of the day he died, and I'll tell you what I find, because I'd be interested in what you think about it. But it was profoundly transformative for me.
Yeah. That line is really sticking with me, that phrase that you used, I can't mother him out of his own death. It's really powerful.
I wanted to. I tried.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, that's even like bringing up for me of just like, I almost felt like when I was coming out of the closet when I was a teenager, my mother wanting to mother me out of the death of that process too. And there's a lot in that phrase. And there is this Scorpio season, there is energy in Cancer that I think is really hot right now. So I wanted to just show you where the Cancer energy is lining up with your chart. And this is an opportunity for all of us to just reflect on the other water signs this Scorpio season, because we have Pallas and Black Moon Lilith in Cancer. And they're right up there at your midheaven. So for you, this is a very public energy of, oh, you're on a podcast talking about this book that you wrote. Whereas there's nothing else in Scorpio right now. As the sun enters Scorpio, there will be that opportunity to shine a light to the Scorpio in your chart. We have a South node in Scorpio, so we're actually clearing out Scorpio energy all year with the South node in Scorpio. Whereas we're evolving towards Taurus, the North node's in Taurus. And I feel that for you as like, you've gotten a house, you now have a baby, like these very physical things that are grounding you and anchoring you. So yeah, we have Pallas and Black Moon Lilith in Cancer right now. And this has actually been very much connected to Black Moon Lilith entered Cancer the day that the Roe versus Wade information was leaked. Wow. So a lot of grief, Lilith, around witches, ancestral energy, and then Cancer around motherhood, pregnancy. And then Pallas is there too, which is like social justice warrior. So you have right now, this year, this energy moving through your 10th house of your public appearance. And I feel it really lining up with the release of Luminary, which is being released on the full moon. Do you get the opportunity to set the release dates?
No, I had no idea they picked it. Yeah.
That's so interesting and witchy.
Yeah. No, completely.
Yeah. What does it feel like seeing some of this Cancerian energy up here encouraging public appearance and career right now?
That makes me really happy to see that. It does feel very, I feel a lot of ease around that right now, where there's been times in my life where I felt really stressed about promoting a book or trying to figure out how to get a book into the right hands or how to get it reviewed or how to get attention for it. And I feel none of that now. And I think it is because this book comes from this nurturing Cancer energy of me wanting to offer it up, whatever kind of gift I can give, especially to young people. So that all feels very aligned in a way that's really relaxing. So it makes me happy to see that. And I also feel that activist part of it, I really, it's not just about me saying, oh, here's some nice tools that I hope you learn to use, kids. I feel like the world is ending and this is my attempt to at least offer up something. It all feels very urgent to me in a way that my other projects, even though I care about them, this one has much more urgency behind it in that way.
Which is also cool because you had mentioned that it came through so clearly and like quickly that it was maybe the quickest that you'd ever written a book, I think I heard you say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's something in there too that could maybe connect us to your Libra rising, because something that is very unique about this book, we talked about the social justice side of Libra, but Libra also likes to collaborate and have conversation with people. And that's, I would say that's a big, almost backbone of the book is the connections and the relationships that you've cultivated throughout these practices, that it's not just about your own personal journey, but how it intersects with other people who maybe have also experienced similar mental health things or depression and anxiety, and they have found healing through these practices. And so there is this relational component and you get introduced to other practitioners. And so I actually had the honor of being the one for your astrology chapter. We sat in a conversation over Zoom like we're doing right now. I think 2 years ago. I didn't remember that it was New Year's Eve until I read the book, which I thought was kind of cool. But yeah, people will probably recognize some of the other practitioners in here, but also be introduced to some new ones. Like I know both Lindsay Mack and Bakara are included in this book. And so where did that idea come to you to have this be a bit more Libran in it, the community engagement and dialogue?
Yeah, it was a complete Libra rising instinct because, I mean, a couple of reasons. I think selfishly, we were right in the middle of the pandemic, and I didn't realize it even as I came up with the idea, but I was creating for myself a reason to interact with people and to have these conversations with some of my favorite people about some of my favorite topics, and to make it relational rather than having to go further into isolation in a moment when I was already feeling so isolated. And that really, I think, also helped me write with such flow because I had these conversations and other people's words to kind of like ride these waves of text and of ideas, and I wasn't completely alone in it. I mean, the concept initially, the reason why I wanted to include other people was because I didn't want to present a singular voice, especially in a book that is marketed as self-help. Mm-hmm. It was very important to me to not be presenting some sort of didactic single point of view of and seeming to say, this is how this should go, this is how you should do things. Whole book is very, anti-authoritarian. And so I didn't even want to present myself as a singular authority. And also, I love astrology, but I'm no expert. I didn't want to be presenting myself as an expert. So I just it felt correct to be bringing in these other voices, and especially in thinking about young adults reading it, to bring in other adults and say, here's how other adults that I know have used these practices in their lives. And here's a lot of different kinds of people and their voices and what they had to say about these things that I certainly wouldn't even think of. I don't think the book would have happened without that. Once I got that idea that I needed to include these conversations, first of all, that just sounded fun to me. So then I got excited about the project, but also it felt to me that made sense, that I would be presenting a lot of different voices to a reader.
Yeah. I feel it's Libra rising, and also your Venus in Gemini, I imagine, is also a part that's very playful and conversational. And of course, Libra's ruled by Venus, so they're in a dialogue with each other. And it's allowing us to continue the conversation now, totally. And now you're on my podcast and we get to go even deeper into the topics. And so, yeah, it feels like this book is also an invitation into continuing to keep the conversation flowing. For those who read it, I'd imagine that they're going to share it with their friends. And it just feels like the connection of togetherness feels like really clear to me, which I think is really good for, like Scorpio Moon, like that might want to like do it on their own, be in private, wallow in despair, that like, actually it's okay. You can come out and we can have these conversations and be in it together. So yeah, the last chapter of the book is titled "What Now?" Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'm feeling I like that you included that chapter in there. The cover is gorgeous too. Just wanted to note that.
I'm so pleased with the cover and with the design of the book, and it was so beyond what I expected. It's coming out from this imprint at Simon & Schuster, and they just, as much as I believed in this project from the beginning, I also felt it was a little bit maybe out there. And, I rail against capitalism a lot in this book. It didn't feel to me like the most marketable book of all time. And so to find an editor who really got it, and then this design team that I don't know, just I felt like they understood it on this level that you can't take for granted. I mean, often book covers are made up of, clip art or stock photos, and they're, fine. But I'm so pleased with how the designer seemed to really connect with the material. It's very overwhelming to me how much I love the cover of this book. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. So the cover will be in the newsletter that I send out with this podcast episode. So if you're part of that newsletter, you all can check out the cover. I'll also have a link in the show notes so that you can pre-order this book, which releases on the full moon, which you can also cast a birth chart for the book too. I'm curious if that's what the date would be. So it's a Scorpio with a Taurus moon. That feels really cool.
I love that.
Yeah. And the cover has, it's like almost like a cosmic hand, I'm going to call it, with astrological glyphs and plants, like almost like tattooed on the hand. And then the backdrop is like pink with flowers. And it's titled Luminary. Where did that title come from for you?
That was my editor's idea, actually. I had been calling it just The Guide. In my head, that was the working title. And she felt she wanted a more magical title. And so we threw around a lot of different ideas and a lot of different words. And in the end, she felt like, okay, let's, we're illuminating something here. And also I liked the idea that luminary, as referring to kind of like these people I've interviewed as luminaries in their field, that was another meaning that could come out of that as well.
What is an astrological word that we use too?
Right.
I would say the planets and the luminaries, which the sun and the moon are the luminaries.
Right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So there's that connection too. Like just even us honoring the new and the full moon is honoring the luminaries. And I think the sun consciousness, the moon, the unconscious, shining a light to what's underneath the surface. And we do that in this book. So there's a few meanings that we could take from this title.
Yep.
So again, I'll put links in the show notes to pre-order that. And then also maybe people will check out your music too. You're in a band.
Yes, our band called The Witch Ones.
What is your role in this band?
I write the songs with two friends of mine, and the lyrics are mine, and then we collaborate on the music. I'm very much not musical. I'm very much just a fan of music, and I mean, slightly tone deaf. So it's so much fun for me to collaborate with them because they're just musical geniuses. And so I'll bring an idea for a song and lyrics to them, and then we work on it together. And it's a very Scorpio Moon project for me. I fully let all my witchy instincts just be fully indulged. And it's pure pleasure. Also, talk about that Scorpio pleasure thing. It's like the most indulgent pleasure I have in my life is making this music with these people. It's completely for me. So we've released an album. We've been working on it for a really long time, and the pandemic interrupted it. We finally released our first album in July, and so you can listen to it on all the streaming platforms and everything. It's got a lot of fun stuff there. And it's just called the album is just The Witch Ones.
Do you think that there's a song that we could listen to for the Scorpio New Moon? Do you think we have permission to do that? And if so, which song do you think would most embody this particular lunation?
I give you permission now. Yes. And I mean, my favorite, I think The Tower, which is actually one of her singles. It's a song called The Tower, and it's about the Tower card and about the destruction of old systems and the rebirth.
That feels appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had already mentioned the Tower on this episode too, so perhaps you place your Tower card out and listen to this song by the Witch Ones.
Structures from the past, and so hey, here comes the tower. It's a real breakdown of power. Gotta tear it down to build it all up again. And once I found a true fear, I could lose it knowing you, dear, would bring it back and then and kill us in the end. So read me over, read the tower down. All evil thoughts can come out and infect the ground. That it stands close to, or else all I've had were some lies that started with you, and now we're at the tower, a real breakdown of power. Gotta tear it down and build it all up again. When I learned to find you, it was too late for a way through. Now they gather round to burn it right to the ground. So read me over, read the tower down. All evil thoughts can come out and infect the ground. Dream. I showed you all the different places, walked around childhood rooms and sacred spaces, and you followed. And I nodded so politely. All I wanted then was to know that you would fight me. And hey, we're at the tower, at a real breakdown of power. Gotta tear it down to build it all up again. Here lightning strikes so hard on the surface, left so scarred it was skin and bone. There's no place to call home. Read me over, read the tower down. All evil thoughts can come out and infect the ground.
Shouldn't have to tell a tower it's falling, and you shouldn't have to know when I am calling to say hi, hello, it's rage again. It's too late for those moments when we could have saved the structure. Now let's stand together, oh, and watch it while it falls.
Then I thought that through the future we two could find a perfect cause to give ourselves to, and we both must come now to finally see that certain battles, those death rattles, are all that's left for you and me. And now here comes the tower, it's a real breakdown of power. Gotta tear it down to build it all up again. Run but no you can't hide from destruction out and inside, and what's left behind just can't bring you peace of mind. So read me over, read the tower down. All evil thoughts can come out and infect the ground. Read the tower down.
thank you for letting us listen to that song and connecting to this other part of your life, which actually in many ways felt like a true expression of your Scorpio moon.
Completely. That feels very, very real. Yeah.
Yeah. And I even feel like when we gathered in ritual for the Fool's Journey, that maybe this was also another kind of Scorpio moon moment too, to have this kind of like underground occult community that you could be witchy with.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it became so influential for me, because it felt so safe and also so fun. I mean, it was, talk about that enjoyment thing again. It was just such pure fun in a way that I don't think my little Scorpio moon had gotten to sort of be free and frolic like that before, and been given so much permission. So, all the good secret societies.
Yeah. I have one final question before we close our time out together. And this one, it's actually come up for me, like where this is maybe shifting us more to your Cancer sun, because it'll be around parenthood. And I've had this come up with quite a few students or clients of just being part of the queer community and having this desire to have family or to create family. And so you did post recently on Instagram. I kind of want to read the caption, and it was about Frida Jo.
Yeah.
And you said, a little Leo lady named Frida Jo has joined our lives. After years of hoping, of seemingly endless complications, of attempting to learn how to navigate medical systems that pay lip service to inclusion, but really have no idea what to do with queer people, of trying to learn to live with loss, we find ourselves moms to a tiny, hilarious elfing. If anyone out there ever wants a listening ear about any of this, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We have found a lot of solace over the years in hearing other people's stories about just how hard this all can be, and we are totally here to give that support to anyone who needs it. Meanwhile, please excuse some cute baby pics, since this is our life now. Yeah, I guess my question would be, what might you say to another queer person who might be feeling discouraged on their journey toward parenthood?
That is a great question. I think I would wish them to be able to stay empowered, but gently empowered, if that makes sense. Because no matter how you go about it, whether medicine and science are involved, whether adoption is involved, however any of it happens or you're trying to make it happen, it is so complicated, and there are so many things that feel like barriers, and queerness ends up, unfortunately, sadly, feeling like another barrier often in these situations. I mean, of course, non-queer couples can find themselves, right, facing similar barriers. But the level of complications that we experienced as a queer couple was about our queerness. So I think there's something around staying determined and staying empowered and not becoming beaten down by the complications, while still not letting go of control, but doing a little manifestation work, right? Like, I want this to happen. I don't know how this is going to happen. I'm going to put all of these little attempts and feels out and do my best. I mean, it didn't happen for us the way we expected at all. The amount of work it took was insane. The amount of emotional work it took, the amount of psychological work that it took. And and feeling very alone and very, the two of us in that aloneness together, but very, very vulnerable up through birth, up through bringing our daughter home. And it's all been very much worth it. So that's, I guess, it brings me back to one of the things I really try and stress in the book, which is when it's hard, it doesn't mean you're not supposed to do it. The difficulty isn't a sign that it's not supposed to happen. It's very hard though, right? Because sometimes you feel like something is very, very difficult and you're banging up against a door that doesn't want to open. And so how to tell the difference between the door you should move on from and the door you should just be quite stubborn with.
Yeah.
So my advice, honestly, for anyone trying to build family who is coming up against complications, is knowing that the difficulty is unfortunately part of it. And I think made us stronger in its own way. I mean, this child was so wanted, and it was so many years of wanting and trying for her. Thank God she's a double Leo, because I was like, I need a kid that's going to show up and be like, here I am, because the energy of her creation was so just like, okay, like anticipation, so much anticipation. And then when she arrived, so much celebration that I really, before she showed up, kind of had a little conversation with the universe of like, you got to send us one that's going to feel comfortable with all this. Like, she can't be shy. She needs to be okay with like what we're bringing to the table. Totally. So I don't know. That's a long answer to your question, but I hope that there's something in there that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot that makes sense in there. And I'm feeling like that the fire element comes after water. And so I'm hearing that expressed, and just having the fire to burn through the karma of whatever the water was holding. And it's also, I think there's a lot of medicine in what you're sharing beyond even people who are on a journey towards parenthood. Like, I relate to a lot of it just as someone who is a queer practitioner that is offering something that is more esoteric, and just, the systems that we live in don't make it easy to make that reality possible, even when it comes down to things like health insurance and reporting taxes, and just like being a part of this system that we find ourselves in while still empowering ourselves. And like you said, gently so. Yes. It feels really, there's a lot in there for us. And I feel your Cancer and your Scorpio moon like coming together and answering that.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and knowing what to fight for, knowing what fights you have the energy for, knowing why you're fighting for it, that's everyday life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with us, and for sharing your heart and your music, your words, your stories. If people want to get in touch with you, or if people want to purchase your book, what would be the easiest way to do that?
I'm on Instagram mostly, and that's just at Kate.Scelsa, Scelsa. And the book you can buy any place you buy books, is wherever you like. And hopefully libraries will have it as well. It should be available to borrow as an ebook if you borrow ebooks from libraries, all those places. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll make it super easy for everyone and have the links to your Instagram and the book in the show notes. And we're wishing for you a transformative Scorpio New Moon, also a gentle new moon as well. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It makes me so happy to talk with you. Thank you so much.
This episode of Cosmic Cousins was brought to you by the generous support of our Patreon supporters. If you'd like to help the production of this podcast, you could go to patreon.com/cosmiccousins, where you could make a monthly donation to the podcast. By making a monthly donation to the podcast, you are also offered a free workshop to only the Patreon supporters. This workshop is a 2-hour lecture on astrology and the body. Thank you again, Cosmic Cousins, as always, for tuning into the podcast. It's such a joy to be here with you. I'm wishing for you an easeful Scorpio season. And I'll see you next time for the Taurus full moon total lunar eclipse. Until then, take sweet care, cousins, and remember, deep breaths.